Hello and welcome. My name is Oleg Feldgeier and I'm the CEO of Canada Green ESCO. I was truly looking forward to the recent Wharton's webcast entitled Understanding Sparks. It took place on April 21st, 2021, and I wanted to better understand the good, the bad, and the ugly behind the latest going public craze. And to make Wharton's webcast more engaging, I published a few comments one day before the event took place. Little did I know that my comments will generate almost 12,000 views in less than 48 hours. Well, in 2020, SPACs accounted for nearly 50% of the entire IPO market. And it is well known that the publicly traded SPACs are blank check special purpose acquisition companies that are supposed to merge with a private company within 2 years. What is less known is that the sponsors who bring SPACs to public markets receive a handsome fee, often up to 20% of the deal value. In addition, only hedge funds and Wall Street insiders often get a free warrant with each IPO share that they buy. Warrants give IPO investors the right to buy a share at a pre-arranged price. It's often $11.50 for SPACs that come public at $10. So what prevents the hedge funds from selling all their shares the next day and get all their money back but still have exposure to SPACs via the free warrants? The answer? Absolutely nothing. You may shake your head, but regardless of the number of shares being sold, the warrants are still theirs to keep. So it is a great deal for the hedge funds, but not so much for the retail investors who buy in the post-IPO market and don't get the warrants to keep. Now, in my initial comments, I stated the following. It seems to me that SPAC pioneers are redefining the meaning of the Wild West by allowing companies to use future revenue projections, something an IPO wouldn't allow for. Merriam-Webster's definition of Wild West is quite concise. It says, a frontier period characterized by roughness and lawlessness. So in my humble opinion, SPACs are legal, but without greater scrutiny and transparency, roughness is here to stay. To me, the valuations based exclusively on future revenue projections are a polite way of imagining the future hand-waving. Many companies that are targeted by SPACs do not produce any revenues yet, don't have a product, and never brought a product to market either. They just ride the wave of huge market potential. And electric vehicle SPACs are a good example of looking at opportunities linked not only to transportation, but also to renewable energy generation, storage, and deployment. Buyers beware. Not so long ago, you were offered a different kind of opportunity linked to the transportation sector. George C. Parker was opening fake sales offices and forging the documents to support his cons. According to Wikipedia, Legend claimed that he saw the Brooklyn Bridge at least twice a week. He did sell it several times, including at least once for $50,000. It was often reported that the new owner would discover he was the victim of a con when the New York police officers would stop such new owners from setting up toll booths in the middle of the bridge. But this was then. So the question I posted was quite hypothetical. Would setting up a SPAC to promote and sell the brand new and soon to be built Brooklyn Bridge and all the electronic tolls on it be fraudulent? I'm convinced that left unchecked, SPACs can draw many financial engineers out of the woodwork. Some would make even Bernie Madoff look like a Boy Scout. For example, what prevents a mammoth-sized VC fund to skip the hard work and go for the jugular in just 2 years? The harvesting can be done as follows. Invest the first round in a startup at a ridiculously high valuation. Undoubtedly, it will shrink the size of a possible syndication. Invest the second round in 6 to 9 months at an even more ridiculous valuation. Invest the third round shortly after at the valuation that makes several existing SPACs salivate. So the grooming phase is over and your work is done. Do the SPAC deal and wait a few months until the vested shares are fully liquid. Then sell the shares and generate a wholesome return to all your GPs and LPs while at it. The problem is that it will take many years to analyze, assess, and write extensive research papers on the subject. And when the regulators finally catch up, a lot of damage has been already done. I would recommend a much simpler solution to avoid Rumsfeld's known unknowns and unknown unknowns altogether. Make a SPAC vesting period far more extensive. It will cool off the engines and force the SPACs to prove the hypothesis works. After all, a hypothesis is just a fancy word for guessing. And do not let just about any acquisition to go through. Allow for the acquisitions of companies that have a longer and demonstrable track record of earnings and valuations. Preserving market's integrity is the key, and we can't let the industry regulate itself. We already tried to do so with the tobacco industry. Remember how that panned out? First, SPACs started to eat the IBs, and now the VCs are eating the IBs and the SPACs. Such huge VC rounds are a good explanation of why so many VCs are now starting their own SPACs. And soon the PEs will be eating the IBs, the VCs, and the SPACs for breakfast. Left unchecked, SPACs may cause more than just minor indigestion. I agree that the concept behind the SPACs is very innovative and creative. I know so, as I was working already a long time ago with the Toronto Stock Exchange TSX on promoting reverse takeovers using the capital pool companies, or CPCs. I wrote about it in my LinkedIn post, Reinventing TSX. Although the CPCs are much nimbler versions of the SPACs, I promoted the CPCs to the Israeli and Chinese technology companies as less expensive versions of the IPOs. However, all such technology companies had a decent amount of traction already. So, in response to some of the SPAC comments I received, I asked the following question. Would anyone invest in a $40 billion SPAC that promised the most advanced and the longest lasting grid battery without ever building one and never even validating the materials that could offer the promised energy density? It's because of greater uncertainty, the rules of the conventional IPOs shouldn't apply to SPACs. Such pose a much greater risk to retail investors. In my humble opinion, comparing SPACs to IPOs is like claiming the short selling equates to trading options. Perhaps the result will be the same in financial terms, but such outcomes were not achieved within a similar context. One is passive, while the other is extremely active. By trading options, you make a personal bet based on your specific beliefs and understandings of the financial markets. You either win or lose. The net effect is affecting you, not the company. Everything else remains passive. But when you short sell, you manipulate the shares and manipulate the share price of the company, and it affects all other investors too. Especially when naked short selling takes place and the company finds that the float is 10 times bigger than the number of treasury shares ever issued. Globalization, anyone? We thought that 40 years of unrestrained globalization was the best thing since sliced bread was invented. Yet COVID-19 just showed us how misguided such policy was and how it decimated North American manufacturing capabilities. And why would we even allow considering share buybacks following the biggest bailout in history by the taxpayers? Are bailouts supposed to benefit only the shareholders instead of all the stakeholders? Is this the best way to preserve and increase the employment levels? Federal government can do much more. It can take a few steps and provide a level playing field. While we embark on a recovery from the worst economic collapse since World War II, businesses need to be temporarily shielded from the peacetime Wall Street pressures. Before 1982, share buybacks were considered illegal and treated as market manipulation by SEC. There's enough evidence 39 years later that tinkering with SEC rules didn't work. It's time to rethink and reverse the mistakes of the past and to make the share buybacks illegal. Is using taxpayers' money to manipulate markets and send a fake message of a greatly improved profitability the best we can do? If corporate profits are to be reinvested in developing new products, building new factories, or opening new stores, they can be redistributed instead. Otherwise, we will be stuck with dwindling employment levels and a diminished capacity to innovate. Still not convinced that share buybacks erode innovation? Remember this. Countries like Israel, South Korea, Germany, Finland, and Switzerland are now spending a bigger percentage of GDP on R&D than the USA. SPACs are not IPO lights, and the vesting period should be much longer due to the inherent risks involved. And I'm convinced that the regulators can implement such changes with ease. Otherwise, be prepared for a roller coaster ride with a twist. By the end of the ride, someone might just hit you over the head with a 2x4 and then politely ask if you are dizzy. Our thinking about the best way to concisely articulate the difference between participating in the IPO versus committing to the SPAC. Well, let's use the bacon and eggs analogy and say the following. The chicken participated, but the pig was definitely committed. But perhaps things begin to change. As recently reported by CNBC, SPAC transactions come to a halt amid SEC crackdown, cooling retail investors' interest, and after a record of 109 new SPAC deals in March, issuance has now come to almost a standstill with just 10 SPACs in April, according to data from SPAC Research. Now, the drastic slowdown came after the Securities and Exchange Commission issued accounting guidance that would classify SPAC warrants as liabilities instead of equity instruments. I learned about the SEC guidance on the day of Wharton's presentation. Naturally, I tried to alert the presenters and ask for the comments, to no avail. It would have been nice to get the questions answered and not to leave the audience hanging with the silence of the lamb in the air. And in light of the almost 12,000 views of my comments, perhaps it's time for Borat to start interviewing some of the SPAC promoters. For more information, please see my videos on YouTube and my posts on LinkedIn, Twitter, Medium, and CG's website. You can also find additional info in my book on Amazon. It's called AI Boogeyman, Dispelling Fake News About Job Losses, and on our YouTube studio channel. Thank you.